Hey, so I promise that this will be the last one for today. I just kind of had an urge to throw a third video in there. And this one is gonna be about what I might call the historical need to create a floor for reality. A floor, like in a house. And to clarify what I mean by example, one of the best modern examples would be the idea of matter, which is at the heart of scientific thinking. But if you go into the history of this concept, it comes from ancient Greek philosophy. There's probably two philosophers before Aristotle who mentioned it. And then Aristotle popularized it. And do you know what it basically came down to meaning? Is matter is stuff. It's not only stuff, but it's stuff that's everything is made out of. And this is basically a form of what in philosophy they would call atomism, which is that everything is made up of indivisible units. These are both outdated. I don't think everyone has seen that the idea of matter is outdated yet. It's unnecessary. So you get to science. Science must have a more objective, the definition of matter, right? The scientific definition of matter is any substance which has a mass, which basically means any stuff that you can weigh. So this is an example of what I mean by the need to build a floor in human thought. We're trying to create a basis upon which reality rests. And almost every possible school of thinking I could think of does this in one manner or another. Um, I mean, going back to matter, even with the modern scientific observations, we know that it's not solid and predictable. It's built up of these crazy processes which don't function according to the apparent laws of nature that we had established with Newton. So there's no floor there. There's no floor in science anymore. There's just probabilities. And you go back into spiritual traditions and you get things like, oh, everything is Brahman, which is the Hindu word for the universal spirit. You get everything is Tao, which is not very definable, but basically just means the way of things, the way behind. And even in Buddhism, the Buddha himself, in the document called the Pali Canon, which was the closest thing to his original teaching, which was passed on orally for a few generations, and then it finally got written down. I'm not sure if he ever claims that there's a ground of any sort. You know, he negates the self. He says everything is impermanent. There is one quote where he says that there is something which is unborn and undying, but that could be interpreted in other ways. It doesn't mean necessarily that there's an eternal floor to reality. But Buddhists over time did get into this sort of thinking where, oh, there's this relative reality and everything here is impermanent. But behind that, there's the eternal, ultimate reality. So even this tendency came up in Buddhism. So it seems to me like it's a universal psychological um, tendency to try to create a basic for the universe, which is also a concept to rest on, but it keeps failing. And my question for you is, why do we need a floor? If we go back to the basic idea that everything is impermanent, everything's changing, why can reality itself not change? There's you know, a much sort of mocked biologist, but also respected, named Rupert Sheldrake, who talks about how the laws of nature may be more like habits and they may change over time. What if this reality that we experience can change? Wouldn't that be interesting? I mean, we've tried building a floor for the house so many times and it keeps failing. So that's why I wonder why we focus so much time outwardly trying to understand it in the first place. I'm gonna take one more jab at science because it's so foundational to the way people perceive the world right now. I'm gonna say that scientific thought, thought based on observation alone, is necessarily limited to the same limitations that mythology of any culture was limited to, whether it was Egypt and Osiris or Greek and the Pantheon. We had this problem where our language that we attach to the phenomena that we're perceiving is not the same thing as the phenomena. I have here, okay, I'm jabbing science, but at least it gave me my recording equipment, right? And, and um, here's a microphone. There's the word microphone, and then there's this. And this is a mystery. So the reason we're trying to create a floor actually is that the mind has no floor. Because the mind, conscious mind, the thought process, is just language. And language can say nothing about reality. So therefore, we have no floor. But our sense of identity is tied up in the linguistic process, which we call the mind or the person. And it's not there. You can't make it a thing. It's just a process happening inside of the human being that we are. And you get back to the spiritual idea of all is one, all is Brahman, which is something I probably would have agreed with for a long time, but I had no way of knowing. That's the whole thing. It's just something that resonates with us, the idea that there's this unifying thing. How do you know that reality is one? You experienced every perspective all at once, or you had a transcendent experience and it felt to you like it was the source of all things. Or you had a innate knowledge about it once you're there. How do you know? What's it? Because it feels that way? Because it feels so convincing? Why does reality have to be one? And as someone who studied mysticism and mystical experiences for years, and someone who's been through the sort of process, which maybe I'll describe my experience in a different video, maybe if I'm feeling open and kind of like having an element of mystery. Um, the descriptions of these experiences are not always the same. Some people describe the transcendent experience as blinding light, which feels like home. Some people describe it as infinite emptiness, which is nothing and which is devoid of anything, but somehow also the womb of all worlds. And some other people describe it as meeting God and actually conversing with this sort of basic mind. These are all transcendent experiences in which the people are having an experience which is taking place outside of consensus reality, but they're described in different ways. So what does that say? Does it say that maybe reality has no floor, just like us? Just like our mind has no floor, maybe reality has no floor. Maybe it's not one. Maybe, just maybe. And maybe because there's no floor, you're free because you're not trapped in the house. You're just falling. And if you fell for a while, imagine falling forever. Eventually, you wouldn't be panicked anymore. You would relax into it, maybe sip on a drink, read a magazine, because you would get used to the rate of acceleration. You would get used to falling. So why are you afraid of falling through the floor? There's freedom on the other side. And freedom is nothing but the freedom to be yourself. Because you are not the stories in your head. You're not the gods that we fashion. And we have new gods too, by the way, like matter. Like in the same sort of tradition, we also have reason. Reason is just acceptable patterns of linguistic thought as opposed to non-acceptable patterns of linguistic thought, which are basically just determined to be such because they derive from non-ordinary states of consciousness and that don't correspond to the consensus reality that the physicists believe in, or that the reasonable realist or whatever believe in. It's just new mythology. So because science has the same handicap as other mythologies of language being fundamentally limited, there's another mythology that's been made out of it. And I'm sorry to say, but aside from a lot of practical uses, a lot of science is just an ego trip. It's just our need to know something. For what purpose are we searching for knowledge outside of ourselves? Through language and through instruments we've created, which use languages we've created. Seems to me like a pretty fruitless search when there is, troubles at home. It's all just escape, escape. You create an imaginary floor to rest on so you don't have to check out the basement. Come on down to the basement. It's not bad in there. You'll just find yourself as you are. And that's freedom, because you real freedom is freedom from even the desire to be free. Freedom from fear, freedom from the need to know. Everything is allowed to be a mystery. And also freedom to do whatever your heart is telling you to do. You know, this world isn't so bad. It's it's your home. And if you want to go extinct with me, and we can keep distracting ourselves from ourselves with all these ridiculous things like entertainment or the quest for knowledge or creating an enemy and having a war, creating all these dramas, or you can sit with yourself and look for the truth of who you are. And when you get to the point, when you get to that limit of language, you can just stop there. Just emptied out and pure, just like a baby. Yet you can still use your language for fun. You'll still be curious, you'll still have fun, still make art, still do whatever you want to do. You just won't be burdened by the stories that you tell yourself every day, all day. Love you guys.